afternoon and welcome again to the Veterans Forum. As you know by now, I'm Bob Stevens, and I have the pleasure and the honor of sharing and helping some of these guys and gals share their experiences of what they did back in the things called World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm. Slowly we're starting to get a real good history of that will not appear in any history book per se, but they're what really happened, told by the guys and the gals who did it. Today, August the 18th, 2010, this will be our third year of doing these programs. We've done some 60 plus, but we're still room for a lot more. So any of you guys and gals out there that think you can and will come and share with us, you'd be more than welcome. And I hope, as most of the guys and gals have said, the treatment doesn't hurt. Today, I'll start just saying that Norm is here with us. I'll ask him to introduce himself, identify his branch of service, where he lives now. Then we'll build a little history as to what happened and how he came to be through all of this, what he was. Norm, we welcome you.
Thank you.
And again, if you will, as I say, give us your name, spell your last name, dates of service, and your current address, if you will.
Norman Brett, B-R-E-T-T, Combat Engineer, 1269th, current address, 37 Churchill Crest in Pittsfield during the summer and in New Jersey in most of the winter. Service was from 1944 to 1946, and there's an interesting story of how I got out so quickly, but we'll tell that story a little later on.
Oh, you've read the script. Okay, all right. Now, we joke, but what we're trying to do, and as we said before the program started, this is your life, what you did and how you did it. But to find out how you got to where you are now, I'd like to go back. You know, where were you born? Your family life, any brothers or sisters, anybody in your family are the veteran of any other war or conflicts? And how was life growing up before you went into the service?
All right. I was born in Manhattan, actually in the Bronx, then we moved to Manhattan. Mother and father both now gone. My father was a waiter, my mother was a seamstress. They were both immigrants, and they represent the true story of immigrant Americans who came here without an education and made a home for their children. They brought up 3 children, all of whom went to school, all of whom went through college, and all of whom were moderately successful in their own respective fields. I had an older brother who was in the Army. He has now been dead a long time. And I have a younger brother who's still with us as a practicing attorney. I went to school in New York only through the beneficence of the New York City scholastic system, which allowed me to go to City College on a scholarship. Otherwise, I would never have been able to get through school.
Oh, what was the scholarship about?
Well, the scholarship was at CCNY in those days. If you reached a certain point, you were entitled to go to college. I went into the School of Business Administration. I had 2.5 years of school behind me when I was drafted. I came back after the war and finished up my degree, and then went on to continue my work towards a master's at NYU in marketing and graduate work in the field of advertising.
Good deal.
So the system worked well for me. Combination of the benefits of the New York City and the GI Bill enabled me to go through school and start out in my career in advertising.
Okay, good.
Which was a fairly moderately successful career.
Okay. Well, the way you smile, it shows you were damn successful.
We had a good time. We had a
Okay.
good time.
Now, you say college. What was your major then? And any particular things that stand out that, if you will, later on help lead to
the truth is that I went into school I went into college just at the age of, I was a young student, so I won't counter on that. I went into college just about 6 weeks after Pearl Harbor. From that point on, for the next 2 years, it was evident that sooner or later I would be in the Army. So the first 2 years of college was pretty much just do enough to get through the grade work, because you know you're going to go to the Army and you don't know if you're ever coming back. So it was the hell with it, let's just go to class.
Just coasting.
Just coasting. Fortunately, I did come back, and I managed to complete 3 years of work in 2, graduated with moderate honors, and caught up to my original freshman grade, made up 2 years of work that I lost. Because when I came back, I realized at that time I really needed that college education.
Amen, brother.
Amen. And I also had a good time because when I came back, I was seated next to a young lady who was named Joyce Brown. This teacher seated us alphabetically. Joyce Brown became my wife, Joyce Brett, and we've been married for 62 years.
We're going to make it permanent then.
We're going to make it permanent. We met in school and we stayed together ever since.
Wonderful. like the saying goes, we flew United, and it's been a wonderful trip ever since. So
It has been a good run. It has been a good
now,
run.
prior to
Yes, sir.
getting in, anything special that you did as far getting into it, enlisting or being drafted? How was your life before that, and then the transition? If you
My life was a typical East Side child of immigrant parents. Very, very difficult, very, very poor, except we didn't know it was difficult. We didn't know it was poor.
remember the club?
Both of my parents worked, and I remember very vividly that my mother would tape to my breast with this piece of what we then called Scotch tape, a nickel, which was, and the phone number was on the Scotch tape.
Okay.
And that nickel was to be used only if I were in serious illness or trouble, call my mother at work, and she would come home.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that nickel stayed taped to my chest Monday through Friday. And at the age of 5, I was fending for myself in the streets of New York, but then so was everybody else, so I was not unique in any way.
Fending in what manner?
Well, I
Push
went to,
cart,
went to
shoe
school.
shines?
No, I didn't do shoe shine, unfortunately, but I went to school, and then I spent a lot of time in the library. I was a frail, puny kid, and I spent a lot of my time in the library reading, and then just trying to hide from other kids. We had the typical Lower East Side background. We had a group of Italian people here, Chinese people here, and Jewish people here. And on Saturday night, we'd meet and shout invectives at each other, throw corn cobs or something, and then run away and go home and say, boy, we had a big fight with the other guys this weekend. But nothing ever happened. Nobody ever exchanged blows. It was not West Side Story in those days. It was more like a lingering hostility, but nothing really ever happened. And that was my background. And we grew up carefully. The family was very, very close, even though both parents worked. And they managed to put all 3 kids through college, along with the help of the city's university system, which was a scholastic situation. And we all 3 graduated. My younger brother went on to become a lawyer. He's quite a successful lawyer. My older brother worked in various jobs in Washington and became a lieutenant in the Air Force and served very admirably.
Good.
What else can I tell you about my background?
Whatever you feel you'd like to share. For
Okay.
example, we keep hearing the classic. One guy said, I was a Brooklynite, and you know what that means. You've given us a very quick 3-section, but anything of that in any way influenced or prejudiced or biased you when you went into the service?
Well, when I went into the service, it was mostly to prove to myself how ignorant I really was. It was a very insular community. I lived in an area where most people spoke Yiddish. And the story is, and I don't know how true it is, but the story is that I personally didn't speak a word of English till I was 5. I frankly don't believe that story, but that's the family legend. And we lived in a very insular community. On the so-called Jewish holidays, you would think that we lived in a small town in Europe. It was completely insulated, and every store shut down, every facility shut down. And if a member of a non-Jewish community happened to wander in, it became very apparent that somebody was here. And we lived in perpetual fear of the pogroms being repeated. We heard stories of the pogroms in Europe. We certainly heard in later years of the desolation being wreaked on the Jewish community by the Holocaust in Germany, and we lived in perpetual fear of that. But it was a tightly knit community where people helped each other, where the synagogue was the center of the community, much as the church is today. And it wasn't until I actually went into the Army that I realized that there were other people and other communities and other lifestyles. Yeah. And conversely, that other people looked upon me as being somewhat unique and somewhat different. It was a very sobering experience, and one that you learn to live with very, very quickly. Oh, yeah. Very, very quickly indeed.
When did you enter the Army? Were you drafted or volunteered?
I was drafted. Okay. I was drafted.
Give us a rundown how it happened and where you went to get in.
I was drafted at the age of 18 years and 6 weeks. I went in January. We did the traditional that almost every GI in that area did. My first base was Fort Dix, New Jersey. We spent about 10 days there getting clothing and getting acclimated and finding out what a sergeant was and what a captain was and living in fear of anybody with a stripe. We lived in perpetual fear. From there I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, but then after several months we shipped to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas. Fort Smith was the local town, but the actual military base was Camp Chaffee. And there we were organized into what became the 1269th Combat Engineer Battalion. The battalion was made up of 3 groups of people. Originally, when I went into the Army, I was assigned to the Army Specialized Training Program, which was a program designed to bring in students, people who had demonstrated a certain level of acumen. And I had some ability in English and some ability in math. And I was being trained to do some work in translation. I never knew what, because it never lasted very long. But the ASTP, as it was then known, had been in existence for 2 years. But then it was summarily canceled. The entire program was canceled. And 1/3 of us was shipped to combat engineers, 1/3 was shipped to infantry, and 1/3 was shipped to artillery. A to X or whatever it was.
There was no choice. You just
No
so far
choice.
down the list and bingo, you went.
I woke up one morning and found I was going to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, to the 1269th Combat Engineers. So about 1/3 of that combat engineer battalion came from what was the remnants of the ASTP program. 1/3 came from volunteers from Tennessee and Tennessee and other areas, and these guys were rugged outdoorsmen. Most of them had never been past high school, but they loved the Army life. And 1/3 were paroled people from the military prisons who volunteered for frontline duty. So we had rather an interesting heterogeneous group. Yeah. And somehow or other we managed to survive, because at that time the overriding enemy was still the enemy, quotes, however you define it. Not amongst ourselves. We had a couple of interesting arguments in between, but we somehow managed. Okay. I was very lucky. I was a puny guy with glasses, and I couldn't defend myself. I was never a fighter. But before we shipped out, about 20 of the guys went into New York, and I invited them down to a restaurant called the Iceland Restaurant, where my father was a waiter. And he picked up the tab for all of us.
Wow.
And he approached one guy who was known quite appropriately as Big Tony, and asked Big Tony to take care of Norman. And don't you think Big Tony did?
So you were adopted.
I was adopted by Big Tony. And there was many an incident where I thought I was going to get my head kicked in, and Big Tony intervened and saved my ass.
And I'll always, technical term.
Technical term. I'll always live in grateful memory of Big Tony.
Have you kept in touch with him, or has he gone?
No. He got killed at the end of the war, and I never met his family or kept track of him at all. We got separated at the end of the war for the last 3 months in a story which maybe I'll tell a little later.
Okay.
Tell you later.
Now,
but I lost track of all the guys except one.
The early days, the classic stories of I went from being a civilian to this thing here. What was your initial 2 or 3 weeks like, as far as getting acclimated, getting your way around, and as you say, making contacts with other Big Tonys unconsciously, but they seemed to work?
Yeah. Well, what happened was, as usual, basic training was the big melting ground for all of us. And all of us had to be shaped into a cohesive unit, if you will call it that. There were some of the guys, especially the ones who came from Tennessee, etc., who just loved the outdoors. They could camp, they could hike, they loved it. The rest of us, the guys from the ASTP, all of whom were college geeks, or high school geeks, or what have you, were totally lost. We were totally lost. However, because the combat engineers had certain units that called for certain skills, we got lucky, if you want to call it lucky. I became, for example, a demolitions expert.
A boomer? Snapper?
I don't know what I've never heard that term before.
That's a British snapper.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, demolitions expert. Our job was to first lay demolitions and then to demine areas by taking up stuff. And that was my specialty. I think it was an M3, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I was a demolitions expert. But the rest of our assignment was to build bridges, combat bridges, not permanent bridges. These are Bailey bridges, and also to lay field across water. We would build bridges to cover water during invasion tactics. And it so happens it worked out in both cases. We did that. But my assignment was to be basically a demolitions expert, which required a certain amount of, if you will, amount of skill. Chutzpah, call it what you will. And also the fact that at that time, I was 18 years and 6 weeks when I went in, but I had 2 years of college behind me. So all of a sudden they thought that I had some brains, which of course I didn't. but I got assigned to be a demolition. Somebody looked at my record and said, put him in demolitions. And all of a sudden I was in demolitions.
Okay, and how long were you trained before they felt you were safe to be at?
Well, the whole outfit was trained for about 8 or 9 months before we were shipped overseas. So that's how long I was trained.
Okay.
And then we went overseas, and all of that training came into bearing as some of these stories will tell later on,
good.
or as you will,
Okay.
as you will.
Now, again, before, or I guess you might say, at deployment, where did you ship from to?
We were shipped back to New Jersey. We departed from they told us Fort Dix. I don't believe that, but we stopped at Fort Dix, and then we were shipped to New York Harbor, and we were put on a boat which took us from the harbor to our transport trip, which was the SS Mariposa. And I hold a record, the record which I think has never been excelled. The only guy between this trip to the Mariposa, which lasted about 20 minutes, the only guy to get seasick.
Okay. Good for you.
I hold that record. But I
Okay.
must say that that record continues because for the next 10 days or 12 days, as long as the trip lasted, I was never unseasick.
How did you sleep?
I
Where'd you
didn't sleep. We slept in bunks. The SS Mariposa had been a cruise ship on
Yeah.
the Pacific. It had been converted to a troop ship. We slept 4 bunks high. I was the lower bunk, which was a good idea because the entire floor was filled with my vomit. And I continually was ill. I remember very vividly. Now, you got to remember, I was not yet 19 years old. I was a private, not a private first class. And to me, a corporal was one step below God.
Yeah.
And I'm lying in this bunk, hoping to die. And a second lieutenant approached me and said, "Are you Private Brett?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You're supposed to be on KP." I told him to go screw himself. And if you have any idea what that means for a PFC to tell a lieutenant,
I know.
you have no idea how sick I was. He turned on his
You had
heel.
to kill me to make me better.
He turned on his heel, walked away, and I never heard from KP again for the rest of that 9-day trip. Towards the end of the trip, I sat up on top and I said, "Sink, you son of a bitch, sink," and the damn thing wouldn't sink.
Okay. It
And-
got you there.
Got me there.
Where? England?
No, we went right to Marseille. We went right from New York to Marseille to participate in the invasion of southern France.
How long was it?
It was a
in
12-day
transit?
trip. A 12-day
Convoy all over and back?
convoy all the way back, zigzagging like crazy. And we landed in Marseille, and within 36 hours, we had our first fatality. By the time our unit was disbanded, some 2 years later, we had close to, I was told, because I don't know these things for a fact, I was told that our statistics were about 80%
Casualties?
combat casualties. Very minor fatalities, but combat casualties. A lot of casualties, very few fatalities.
You know, when you're out front, you know, there's no place to hide, no
There's
matter
no
where
place
the hell
to-
they put you.
Well, our job was picking up mines, so a lot of these things happened not in the heat of battle, but either before the battle or after the battle, clearing mines. A lot of it was during actual combat operations.
Okay, now when you say clearing the mines, you laid your own minefield, but also you had to take lots of what the Jerry's left too, didn't you?
That's most.
That was the best part.
That was the worst part. That was the worst part. And we had if I can tell a funny story about that too, it sounds funny now, but I've told it to the grandchildren so often. The way you clean the mines in those days, I guess it still is done, is a 3-man team. One man goes out ahead with a mine sweeper. You may have seen these.
Yeah, these detectors.
These detectors, which have a swath of 3 feet to the left and 3 feet to the right, and you have to go in a straight line to make sure you go. And if you hear a beep, you drop a white marker right on where you think you hear the beep. The second man comes along and confirms it, and the third man comes along with a bayonet and tries to. The second man disarms it, and the third man digs it up with a bayonet.
Okay.
Well, we're about 35, 40 feet into this supposed minefield. We haven't heard a beep. And one of the gentlemen behind me, one of the guys, says to the front guy, "Haven't heard a beep." The guy up in front says, "No, it hurt my ears. I turned it off."
Oh, that's like applying for swimming lessons as the ship is going down.
We froze in place. We stayed there 8 hours until they got a relief team to come and dig us out again. And as it happens, we were surrounded by mines. This stupid SOB turned it off. It hurt his ears.
Oh.
So there goes all the heroics.
Well, how did they ever let a guy like that out? Didn't they ever have an
They
audio
took him
tape?
out of the unit that day. We never heard from him again. How he got through, we'll never know. But we never saw him again.
Okay, question.
Sure.
My, if you will, CB engineering type mind. If you hear the beep and drop the thing, do you proceed ahead or do you go back?
You go back.
Okay,
you go
you
back.
don't go
no,
advancing.
You go back until the second guy takes disarms it by pulling out the
Detonator.
The detonator. Then the third guy digs it up a little later.
Okay.
But the first guy goes back, then the second guy comes to disarm it.
When you get them done, do you actually put it on a pile
Just
someplace,
leave
or
it.
just
Just leave
marked
it right.
anywhere?
Leave it right there. Somebody's, I don't know who, but somebody comes along and picks up the at that time supposedly disarmed bombs.
Okay. Now, as you're going ahead, bing by bing by bing by bing, do you have some sort of a stringer like they have, police don't cross bar, or some string or something?
We leave a straight string because supposedly 35, 40 feet to the right, there's another group doing the same. We say 35, 40 feet to the right because if one of us inadvertently trips the bomb, only one group gets hurt, not the group next to it. So we'd have a strip here, 30 feet, another strip, then we'd come back and do the intervening strips.
Okay.
Until we had enough road cleared for a truck or a troop or some manpower to go through.
What's it usually, 10 feet, 12 feet?
Usually it was about 15 feet because the
15,
trucks were that wide. Then the intervening stuff we would leave marked danger and had never been cleared, and it could, for all we know, it's still uncleared.
That's one of the problems they're having now.
That's one of the problems they're having now. They're still finding uncleared mines.
That's scary.
It is scary indeed. It is scary indeed.
Now, your little biography here, you did this in France, Belgium, Germany, and Italy.
Yes.
Can you walk us through the different countries as to what you see, what you saw?
Well, we landed in, and a lot of this is what we were told. Remember now, at a level of a PFC, and a kid who was scared to pick his head up most of the time, most of what we're told is what we believe. I never saw a map. I never got confirmation. This is what we were told where we are. We landed in Marseille. We were assigned to Menton, France, and we spent some time there. And we had some fun in Monte Carlo, which I can tell you about as another story.
Please do.
May I digress? Okay.
Yeah, we got to put some life in this place.
Okay, it's life in the place. We're on a truck. We're supposed to be going from point A to point B. We have a lieutenant whom we called.
Careful now, there's kids listening.
Okay, we won't even mention his name. Lieutenant. And he said, make this turn, make that turn, and all of a sudden we're in front of what is a huge building, what you would today easily identify as a casino. But at that time, being kids from New York, never having been to Monte Carlo, we didn't know it was a casino. The lieutenant says, you guys go in here and set up the machine gun here and do this, that, and the other thing. And we go in, we take the covers off the table, and it's a crap table. Well, of course, the guys are playing crap while we're setting up machine guns. Suddenly, the lieutenant comes rushing in, harried and white. Inadvertently, he'd crossed over into Monaco.
Uh-oh.
Now, you've got to remember that at that time, Monaco was neutral.
Yeah.
Had we been caught there, we'd be interned, which is, of course, what we all said. Let's stay here until they catch us.
Catch me, I'm all yours.
Catch me, I'm all yours. But it didn't take long till we packed up our gear and we got out of Monte Carlo back into France. And we were in Menton. We were in, the rest of the unit was in Sospel, which was nearby. It was in Menton that I had one of my narrow escapes. I was standing next to a gentleman as close as to you. We were less than 50 miles from the German batteries in Italy. And a shell came in, hit a tree. The tree knocked off a branch. The branch went through the chest of the man standing next to me and killed him immediately. And I stood next to him and threw up and was sick for a day. Yeah. But that's how close, that was my first brush.
Someone's on your shoulder.
First brush, something was on my shoulder. So we were in Menton, France, and we were there for, at that time we crossed over the border into Italy and back and forth. We never knew exactly where. From there, we were part of, you must have seen the movie Patton, where Patton decides that to swing
Gentleman George.
To swing the Fifth Army all the way up to relieve the troops in Belgium. Mm-hmm. We were part of that group. We were part of the group swinging north. We were in summer clothes from southern France swinging north. I don't think we ever got to the actual area of the Bulge itself, but we went through combat, we went through German towns, we went through Belgium, then we swung right into Germany. We went as far as Munich. My unit got a commendation for being the first troops into Munich. That's as far as we advanced. We stopped in Munich. We performed some work there. We were in Munich when the war ended, but some 3 months before that, I was detached and sent on different work, which we can talk about a little later.
Okay.
But those are the three highlights of my geographical unit. France, with some forays into Italy, Germany, and Belgium. In France, in Mentone, in Sospel, we hooked up for a while with the 442nd Combat Nisi.
Oh, Nisis.
You may have heard them.
Oh, yes.
This was just after they were brought up from Italy. They were sent up for R&R. And they were on their way to Monaco, or to wherever the hell they were going. But we stayed with them for about 2 weeks. They were the most wonderful guys you can ever hope to meet. They had just sustained grievous injuries in Italy. We were new troops. We were still fresh. We were still in awe of what they had been doing. And they regaled us with tales, most of which were probably true. But they were a wonderful group of guys. But they had sustained terrible injuries in Italy. And I will always respect the fact that even while they were doing all that, they still were encouraging us and were supporting us in our being new to France. It was in, shall I just keep on rattling?
This is
okay.
the stuff that we like to hear about.
You may have seen somewhere on those records that I got a Purple Heart. It was in Mentone that I got a Purple Heart. This same lieutenant whom I described to you as leading us into Monaco inadvertently.
The bright one.
The bright one, okay. The assignment of laying demolitions and clearing work involves the fact that a demolitions expert, in this case, the esteemed 18-and-a-half-year-old, 19-year-old Norman Brett, who couldn't tell a couldn't tell a front end of a dynamite stick from the back. Of course, by this time I was pretty expert in the demolitions we had then. We were sent up into the Alps above Mentone in order to clear an emplacement which we were told would house an artillery weapon aimed into Italy. Okay. We were less than 35 miles. The rules were that the one who carries the demolitions do not carry the
detonators.
The detonators. Yeah. See, these words are eluding me after all these years.
I bet I can help you.
Don't carry the detonators. So we're up in the mountains, freezing your ass off. It's summertime, but it's cold up there.
Yeah.
And the ground is as hard as a rock. The only way to clear a spot for this is to use a shovel and or your bayonet. The only trouble is there's some Germans over there who don't want us to do this. So they're shooting at us while I'm lying on the ground digging a hole. Mean people. I put the demolition stuff in and then cover it, because you have to cover it to give it to enclose the blast. And I turned to the lieutenant for a cartridge. He forgot the cartridges. So there we are with the demolition in and no cartridge. Fortunately, unfortunately, if you will, we had some cartridges which we had taken from the mines we had
interchangeable?
Well, we didn't know whether they're interchangeable. We had taken these out of their mines perhaps 1 or 2 days earlier. We decided to try it. So I went back out again and put the new cartridge in, wrapped around a wire, and sunk it into the thing, and did it all over again. By this time, my hands are bleeding, because at this point, we're doing it all in cold weather. So we go back 35 feet, turn the detonator, absolutely nothing happens. What we have now is what we technically call a hung cartridge.
Hung cartridge, yeah.
We don't know if the cartridge is defective, if the wiring is defective, or if it's just slowly burning and will detonate at any given moment. But we can't leave it like that. So naturally, Private Brett is sent out there to do it again. Only this time I can't use a shovel or a bayonet, because if I do, I'm liable to spur that cartridge and blow it up in my face, which it might do anyway. So it took 41 minutes of digging with my bare fingers, snow and ice, hard as a rock, with enemy fire trying to get at me, and I was hidden behind a rock. They never shot me. I managed to get the damn cartridge out. I threw the cartridge over the hill, because it could go off in a moment. It hit a rock and exploded, not me doing anything at that point, indicating that it had been a live cartridge. Yeah. By that point, my fingers and hands were a total shambles. We left the demolitions in there, because without a cartridge it meant nothing. And I was taken back.
You have to mark it, though?
They marked it, I guess so. I never saw it again. They took me down in a Jeep and shipped me to a hospital about 20 miles back in Marseille. I spent 2 weeks there, and this leads to another story. I spent 2 weeks there, and at the end of 2 weeks, the doctors came over to me and said, well, we've got to take certain x-rays. If XYZ shows, your hands are going to be all right. If ABC shows, we have to amputate, and we have to amputate tomorrow.
Yippee. Give you a lot of time to make up your mind.
Well, I have no choice. This is what they told me. So with my hands covered up in tape and gauze and everything, I take the order down to the x-ray room, to the x-ray technician, who is a staff technician, and ask him to take the x-rays, which of course he does. Then I
with
say,
the bandages.
with the whatever he did, I'll be damned if I remember. I was too scared to think of what I was doing. I took the x-rays, then I said, okay, can I have the pictures now because I have to take them up to the doctor? And he said, oh no, it's 5 o'clock, I quit, my working day is over, I've got a date in town. Hey, Sergeant, amputation and all that, you know, can't you give me the picture? He says, screw you. What else could I do? He's a sergeant, so I hit him. And here I am, we're rolling around, I'm all bandaged up, I'm hitting him inadvertently. They broke it up, they sent the pictures up, and as you can see, they did not amputate, but I got court-martialed. So the next morning, the colonel of the military hospital calls me and the sergeant in. This was the next morning. And he was not a military officer. He'd been a doctor who'd been brought into the Army.
Humane person.
Well, okay, you use that term.
Okay.
I wouldn't dare.
All right, I don't know. I'm anticipating it. All right.
And he said to the sergeant, Sergeant, considering the circumstances, and would you mind if we dropped the charges? They dropped the charges, and I never got court-martialed. And they didn't take off my fingers. And here I am. And that's how I got the Purple Heart.
Okay.
And that Purple Heart came in very handy about a year and a half later.
316?
316, what does that mean?
GI Bill?
No.
Okay, it's your story.
Okay, well then I'll leap ahead. It's 2 years later. The Germans have surrendered. There are millions and millions of GIs in Europe trying to get a ship to come home.
Okay.
They sent us home for a 30-day furlough en route to being transshipped to Japan. By this time, I'd gotten a field commission, and I was a second lieutenant. And we're being shipped home to be sent to Japan. In the middle of the trip, the word comes down that the Americans dropped something called an atomic bomb. Call it luck, if you will, but I'd had a couple of years of college. I had some idea of what an atomic bomb was. I didn't think the war would last, and I didn't want to go to Japan, and I didn't want to go as a second lieutenant. I walked in and resigned my commission on the ship. Otherwise, I'd have been involved for 4 more years. I resigned the commission. The story is, and I don't believe it, the story is that the ship behind us was turned around and sent back to take GIs who'd been there 4 years. We were past a certain point. We landed in the States. A day later, the Japanese surrendered. I got sent home on my regular 30-day furlough.
I was a PFC or
I was
Second John?
PFC. I went in as a private. I came out as a PFC. Great promotion. PFC. I got a 30-day furlough. I got an extension of 30 days. By now, I had no money and no friends. Everybody was sick of me. Go away already. How many parties can we have? I got another 30-day furlough. Finally, I was called back, and I never did get transshipped to Japan. I'm here in the States in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, trying to keep busy when they announced the discharge levels. 50 points in the States. You had to have about 180 points overseas to be shipped home in priority. But if you were in the States with 50 points, you could get out. Between the time of service I had overseas, Combat Star, 3 Combat Stars, and a Purple Heart, I had 51 points. So in a space of 2 years and 2 months, I was discharged where some unfortunate GIs were stuck 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and was screaming for transportation home, and I got out.
Now, did you ever qualify for combat entry badge?
No.
In one of your
No.
citations?
No. I tried. I just couldn't physically do it. I never got a combat infantry badge.
Okay.
We never really tried for that. We were combat engineers.
I know.
We looked with disdain on the infantry. We looked with disdain upon those guys. They
And
came
you're
behind
reveling in
us.
the mud, and they're watching over.
Well, they always came behind us. We went first.
Oh, yeah.
We had to build a bridge that
The
they
elite.
crossed over. We had to pick up the mines that the enemy had left. We had to clear the booby traps. Then came along the poor lowly infantry. We looked with disdain upon the infantry.
Allah bless you. Now, on your way home,
Sir.
your first and last time, what was the reception when you got home? After all the hoorahs and hoop-days?
I was a hero.
How'd you feel?
I was a hero the first 30 days. By the second 30 days, they
didn't want you
They didn't
around.
want me around anymore. They'd heard my stories. They all had their own lives. I had nothing. But it was a great time anyway. We had a great time.
Okay, now, by then, were you then married, or did you get married
No,
after that?
I can tell you a funny story about that too. How come I'm telling funny stories?
That's what I want to know.
Okay, these are funny stories.
Okay, I'm laughing.
When I was sent home, we had never had time to call ahead and say, Mom, I'm coming home. Nobody from the family knew I was home because we were on a combat. We were being sent home. Remember, the Japanese war was
Okay,
still
still
on.
in security.
Still security. I landed in the States, let's say on a Monday. By Tuesday, I was recovered from saying hello to Mom, and I wanted to go visit my girlfriend, whom I'd been writing to for 2 years, V-mail, and I don't think she could read my handwriting, because if you read my handwriting here,
I couldn't.
you couldn't. And if you look at the V-mail, nobody could read it. Somehow we got engaged. I think it was a fake, but anyway, we got engaged.
She trapped you.
She trapped me. Anyway, I went up to school where I knew she was. I went to the office to ask what class she was in. They wouldn't tell me because it was security. They don't give out the information. But the young lady who was working in the secretarial office knew me because I'd been a student there.
Oh.
And there I was with my uniforms, with the ribbons, with all this stuff sewed on.
Yippee.
Yippee. She told me where she was. I walked up to my then girlfriend's class, opened the door, picked her up out of her chair, took her outside, and gave her a big fat hug. That's the first time she knew I was back home.
And the kids in the class must have clapped.
No,
like
they
that.
were all
Really?
in awe. They didn't know what was going
Oh.
on. They didn't know what was going on. The teacher was mad as all hell at me.
Why?
I broke up his class.
Oh.
But after that, things got smoothed
Yeah,
out.
they sure do.
And we did get married. We did
Okay.
get married a little while after.
Now, when you're home, you said earlier you did take advantage of the GI Bill after
Yes.
having gotten married?
Yes.
So that you were encumbered if you were going to school on the bill.
Well, we had a unique situation in New York City. CCNY was at that time a free scholarship for all New York City residents who passed certain academic standards. I'd been going to CCNY on a scholarship before school. I went back on a GI
continuing.
Bill, and then when I graduated from there, I went to NYU to get a master's in marketing. So I did take advantage of the GI Bill, and I went all the way through and got my master's in marketing.
Good.
And I then built a career which worked out pretty well for us.
Okay,
But we're
good.
talking about military stuff.
Well, not necessarily military, because let's face it, your life isn't just one little patch. It's all those days, good and bad, that got you where you are today.
Okay.
Any of those things you'd like to share?
Now, I think I'd rather stick to what we did
Okay.
in the.
It's your choice, man.
That's where I want to stay
Okay.
at the moment. You asked me if I met any friends. I forget how you phrased it, and I
Yeah,
told
any
you.
buddies, any combat.
Yeah. Let me tell you a very warm story which just had its culmination or continuation less than 2 weeks ago. In the Army, I became very close friends with a man named George Agan. George and I became very close friends. We were probably both the same kind of geek. We couldn't make too many friends anyway. We became very, very close friends. After the war, we came back. We stayed friends for about 3 or 4 years. Then we drifted apart because I could not keep up with him financially. He came from a very well-to-do family, and I was just not able to keep up.
Different league.
Different leagues. We drifted apart. We stayed friendly, but we drifted apart. I didn't hear from George for about 50 years. About a year and a half ago, I got a call from some people who are, they said, making a history of our combat unit. And I think I brought some
Yes, you
pieces
got it
of
right
that here. They were making a history of our combat unit. And I asked them, where did you get my name? They said, from George Agan. I said, where the hell is George? They gave me his phone number, and he lives in Valdosta, Georgia. I picked up the phone, and I said, George, this is Norman. And he said, what took you so long to call?
Oh?
George and I have now renewed our friendship, and it's as
Beautiful.
warm as it ever has been.
Yeah.
I visited him in Valdosta, and he visited us in Pittsfield, and he left here in Pittsfield no less than 5 days ago,
Beautiful.
which is why we had to cancel our appointment last week.
Okay.
And it's such a warm relationship. When we got together, it was as if we hadn't been apart. And we started telling stories. We stayed up for each of 3 nights. The 2 wives fell asleep both times, and we kept saying, remember when,
Yeah.
and remember when, and did you, and how are you, and it was just
Oh,
a
yeah.
very warm relationship. and he's down in Valdosta, Georgia.
Still alive and well?
Still alive and well, and he's very active in veteran circles. I'm not, he is.
Okay, talking about that, did you join the Legion, the VFW,
No,
JWV?
I didn't join anything. I now belong to the Jewish War Veterans because they helped me gain certain benefits. But I personally am reluctant, recalcitrant, and I'm just not that kind of joiner. I just have never belonged to any of those things. It's just it's a fallacy for me. I wish I were. I wish I had more friends from that group, but I don't.
Well.
But I don't. Okay, let's see. What other stories do I have here that I can talk about?
You have them.
Okay, there is a note here that I wanted to point out where I indicated to you that 3 months before the end of the war, I was detached from my unit. Okay. Picture this situation, if you will. I'm in the Combat Engineers, which gives me certain skill and experience in demolitions. I spoke 2.5, 3 years of college-level French. I could maneuver in Germany because I spoke quite a bit of what was then called Yiddish, still is Yiddish, but enough German so I could get around in Germany. I had at that time a temporary field commission as second lieutenant. I was detached from my unit and attached to a unit called of the CIC, Counterintelligence Corps. This particular group was assigned in the closing months of the German war to seize whatever documents they could. They're the kind of group who found out where the artwork, where the famous artwork was.
Jewelry and all that.
Jewelry. But this particular group I was assigned to try to get documents which would prove the identity of the SS, which would prove where they had certain other materials. I swear I don't know exactly what, but they were always looking for, quote, documents. The rest of the outfit was consisted of, must have been about 10 guys like myself. We were assigned in groups of 3. An officer who could be a major, colonel, or one-star general, a driver and a machine gunner, and 2 vehicles, and then a guy like myself. My job was demolitions, identification, translation, and following maps. We were assigned to certain spots. The most exciting one at the time was we were in Mannheim. We were told that in Mannheim, at this particular segment, at this particular spot, was this particular safe. In that safe were supposed to be records consisting of the Waffen-SS who were deserting the German army, melding into the civilian population in Bavaria. We had to get that list and ferret out those people. So, in advance of the army, we would race in, and by this time there were no street maps or anything, so there were no street signs saying this way to the post office kind of thing. So using old maps and what I was supposed to know about language, I had to direct them, or I had to lead them to where the spot was, and then using my demolition skills, break open the safe.
So you're a legal safecracker.
Legal safecracker, which we did. In this case in Mannheim, we found absolutely nothing. It turned out to be not necessarily a wild goose chase, either it never had been there, or it was taken away, or they cleaned it out before we got there. So that turned out to be not so effective. A later expedition turned out to be much more effective. About 3 weeks later, I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. 2 units of their division was assigned to capture what was then the Daimler-Benz plant in Mannheim, Germany. And it was my job to meet up with them and lead them through the streets of Mannheim to seize the Mercedes-Benz plant. The story was, and I have no testimony to this, the story was we wanted to capture it before the Germans destroyed it, and or before the invading Russian army took the machinery.
Oh, you're that close.
I don't want to testify to the politics because I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
You know, if one corporal tells one private, doesn't mean it's true, but that's the way it happened.
But they usually know what's going on.
Anyway, I led this group in. We did indeed find the Mercedes-Benz plant, and we did indeed seize it. So if any of you people watching this are driving a Mercedes-Benz car, it's my fault.
I can't afford the hubcap, let alone drive one.
So I led them to the Mercedes-Benz plant.
Great.
So we did this. I was with this group for about 3 months, and we had several incidents like that. Another one was we were pinned down outside of Berchtesgaden when 2 guys came reeling into our room, sober, drunk as a lord. Hey guys, where did you get all this liquor? It seems that there's a brewery X blocks from here, and everybody's loading up with beer. Okay, so there's 5 of us. We draw lots, and who do you think gets picked to go get the beer? No,
You were the bellboy.
I was a bellboy. So I put 5 or 6 canteens around my neck, and
Okay.
I'm
Clink, clink,
clink, clink, clink, when a bullet went right by my head into a building next to me, and I suddenly realized at the age of 19, I don't even drink beer. What the hell am I doing here going for beer? My bravery evolved. I turned on my heel, went back. The guys never got beer.
Oh, they didn't send somebody else out?
I don't know if they did. I think they wanted to shoot me and send me out again.
Okay.
But I never did get the beer. But we were the first troops into Munich. That was a whole later time. I'm jumping around.
Okay, but that's all part
because
of
that's the way
history.
the imagination is going.
Now, talking about the Russians, did you have any opportunity or disadvantage of getting to meet them or work near
No,
them?
I never got anywhere near
stay
that close.
way ahead of them?
Never got anywhere that close. I got sent back to Camp Lucky Strike, being shipped back to the United States en route to Japan, and that other story. So I never got that close to them. I was assigned to the CIC for 3 months. When the war ended, then I was sent back.
Okay, and they took back your commission and all that good
No, I resigned the commission. They didn't take it back.
Oh,
they
could-
probably would have taken it back
Oh, yeah.
anyway. It was
But
a
you said it
field
was
commission.
temporary, yes.
Well, it was temporary because what happened was we were someplace outside of Stuttgart, and the colonel came by and said, "Who's in charge here?" And there was nobody left in charge because everybody was shot or wounded, and I was the only guy who could speak English and speak enough Yiddish and knew combat engineering stuff to move. He said, "I'm making you temporary lieutenant. Go here and do this, and then go back there." That was my temporary lieutenant. And so all of a sudden I became lieutenant, but I had no skills. I could not have been a good lieutenant. I was a young, raw kid. And I was on that ship, and I knew I didn't want to be a lieutenant.
Okay, well, if you know, self-fulfilled prophecies and all that good stuff.
So I resigned.
Okay, now I'm going to do a little plowing if you
Go
will.
ahead, surely.
Do you have any memories of some real good R&R? If you had any R&R.
This is going to be shown to my children and my wife. I don't dare tell you this. Yes, I have one story. One story I can tell you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let me bless you.
Okay. We were in Mentone. No, we were not. We were in Germany. Paris had fallen perhaps 4 or 5 weeks earlier. We had a drawing to get one guy get a pass to go back to Paris. So of all the guys to go back to Paris, who gets the pass? Me. A 19-year-old
time.
kid who had never been with a woman, who was scared silly. I get the trip to go to Paris. I was offered untold sums of money, but I wouldn't give up that trip. So it took us 2 days to get to Paris, and then I'm assigned to a hotel with 5 other guys, and everybody says, "Gee, you've got to go down to a place called Place Pigalle."
Pigalle.
Place Pigalle. What happens at Place Pigalle? That's
Okay.
where all the women are, okay?
As the shade comes down.
Right. So that evening, I'm on my way to Place Pigalle when out of the shadows leaps a harridan, if you will, at least it seemed that way, may have been Mona Lisa for all I know, seized me by the privates and offers some, I better be careful
No,
what
careful
I say,
now, yeah.
offers some very, very luscious activities for a minimum of 5 cigarettes. What do you think I do? I hit her, knock her down, and run back to the hotel.
You didn't have enough cigarettes, or you went back to get more cigarettes?
No, I went back to hide.
Okay.
I went back to hide. I refused to lie. I'm telling you, I was a cowardly kid. I went back to the hotel, and I went sightseeing the next few days. I never went down to Place Pigalle.
Okay, question.
Surely.
Among all your citations, did you get the Good Conduct Bar for
I
that?
did get the good conduct
Good.
card.
So
yes.
see, it paid off.
It paid off.
You
It paid
in
off.
full.
It paid off.
Okay, I'm going to try to wrap it up, but not squeeze it out.
Good. Have we finished our
We're getting there.
Good. Go ahead. I've got some more stories to tell.
I know. I'm just trying to let you get back, because watching you old guys get back up is an exercise.
Believe you me, you're right. That is
I
a
know.
hard exercise.
In kind of a summation, if that's a good term, with all your experiences in and out of the service, what's your reaction? Was that a positive or a negative effect on your lifestyle?
And on my lifestyle, a very positive effect. I went into the Army a scared, insecure kid who had never been away from home, never been away from the lowest status of Lower Manhattan, which was an insular immigrant community, all Jewish, if you will, but with a Polish community here, an Italian community here, Chinese community here, but we very rarely intermingled. And I came back aware that there was a world out there, aware that I had certain strengths and skills and I could survive, and aware of what I needed in an education. Where in college earlier I had laughed my way through school, I came back and I did 3.5 years of college work in about 2 years. And I never lost the confidence after that to assert myself. I never again was a coward, and I grew
coward,
up.
But meek.
Meek, call it what you will.
Okay.
I grew up in the Army. You grow up very quickly when people are dying and when people are shooting at you.
Yeah.
You grow up very, very quickly. And I had responsibilities. Suddenly knowing that what I was doing with demolitions would involve my friends in front of me and behind me. Knowing that if I did this wrong, somebody would get killed, makes you grow up very, very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, it was a very sobering, mature experience.
The old bit, you know, you take care of my back, I'll take care of yours. And
That's-
it pays off
that's-
every damn time.
That's about the way it goes. That's about the way it goes. It's an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone, but the beneficial effects can be good. I must confess, I got a Purple Heart out of it. I was wounded, but my wounds I was able to survive. I still do everything. My fingers give me quite a bit of difficulty, but it's survivable. There are many of my friends who didn't come back
That's right.
or came back with grievous injuries. What I'm saying has obviously been said 1,000,000 times by many people who are more articulate, but it's a very sobering thought to remember.
Oh, yeah. Anything more you want to add? I won't say funny story,
no.
but kind of a summation.
Summation,
We got-
only
we
the
got
philosophy.
about 2 minutes.
The philosophy, war stinks. Any movie with John Wayne or any other hero you see is a lot of baloney. War is terrible, war is awful. People die, people get hurt. Sometimes it has to be done. In my case, because of the fact that I was born and raised Jewish, and the war against the Nazis involves, as we obviously must know, an awful lot of rescue work of the Jewish population. I had a particular influence. And the Nazi threat, along with the Japanese and the Italian threat, was one that had to be countered. If you want to call it a good war, if there is such a thing, it was a good war. But in general, war should be avoided at any time, and anybody who says anything else has got to have his head examined.
Yeah. Amen. In the words of Shakespeare, welcome home. We thank you. God bless you.
Thank you for having me on this program.
Amen. Our pleasure. That's a wrap, folks. Again, one more guy telling you what he did. Those of you who have yet to come, please, let's go. The guy said the other day, I'd like to have these people talk to me while they still can talk. It's not a numbers game, but we are fighting a thing called time. As a statistic, I was told when we first started this program about 3 years ago, some guy did a bean count, if you will, and there were some 16 million guys and gals who served throughout the world during World War II. As of, they say, 2 or 3 years after we started this program, statistically now, the old guys like me, and perhaps Norm, are dying at the rate of about 12 to 1,500 a day. So it's my kid. My son said one time, you know, Dad, you're becoming an endangered species. I did 65 years ago, but I'm not hanging crepe. But please, guys, if you have a story to tell, you've got to tell it, because if you don't, nobody else can do it for you. Again, Bob Stevens saying thank you. Come back and see us. We need you. Stay healthy. Au revoir.